I didn't put the questions to him because you can't question someone on arrest, but you can make a note of anything that they say. And he made this comment. I told him he was under arrest for murder, the 2 murders at Heathfield Terrace, and that's when he said, "Don't know what you're talking about, I've never been there."
I just denied it, point blank.
Denied it. So in the flat, it was just a 1-room flat, bed on the floor, no bed, back was on the floor, very tidy. There was lots of literature in there about death and how to kill people.
Oh really? What, like he's written or like
books? Yeah, anything, and he kept lots of odd notebooks where he'd make notes of odd words, all to do with death. So that was all seized. Also in there was a red metal, the old-fashioned red metal toolbox. It opens both out like a concertina. And in there was a rope, obviously for incapacitating people, some sheath-type daggers that are designed to kill people, basically, that you can get on the internet or wherever. A few things, but nothing to directly incriminate him with any of the rapes or with the murders of Jazmine and Samantha. So he was taken to Bexley Heath, and that's an interesting thing. In the van there was a woman police officer, and she came with me, sat with him in the back of the van down to Bexley Heath, sat with him on the other side of him. We got out of the van into the charge room at Bexley Heath, and when Napper was in front of the charging sergeant, I said to the woman officer, "How tall do you think he is?" And she said, 5'9", 5'10", because he walked with a peculiar stoop, a gait-like stoop, and everyone thought he was much shorter.
Sure. I've seen a couple of photos of him online. He's sort of hunched over, isn't he? So I suppose that gives that sort of appearance.
And all of these victims, rape victims, had underestimated his size, apart from one who, again, oddly, one of the later ones, put him at over 6 foot. But then, when she first reported it to the first officer, but by the time she came down to make a written statement, he turned into 5'9". Now, how that happened, I don't know, Lee, but that's what happened.
So, just ask you, what's the you found a tin in the woods?
Yeah, that's there are a couple of other incidents. We started to ferret around about what he'd been up to, and found a report of some children in the woods in Plumstead Common. They'd found a biscuit tin, and kids dug it up. I don't think they found treasure. Opened it up, and there was a .22 firearm in there. So they ran home, told their mum and dad, and they said, "Better tell the police." So the police came down. Police came down, took the firearm away. That was tested against crimes and things that couldn't be matched up. They fingerprinted it, and then it was sort of just forgotten about. But we found this old crime sheet, so we looked at that. We realised that they'd fingerprinted the gun and put the gun through all sorts of tests, but they'd never done anything to the tin. Oh, so really? We resubmitted the tin for fingerprints, and on the lid, on the inside of the lid, was a complete handprint of Robert Napper. So that was never ever put to him as a charge. But these were the sorts of things, and there's no doubt that he had hiding places all over the place where, because Samantha, there was a part of her body missing as well.
Oh really?
So we always felt that we
never got found.
That was a bit of a saga in itself. But after the first PM, they missed it, but you could see from the shape of the body that it wasn't right. And then another pathologist was brought in, and he quickly realised that he'd cut out a large section of abdominal wall. For whatever reason, we don't know, but I certainly believe that that's probably buried somewhere on his paths. And another thing that he'd done, that we know he'd done, again, looking, it was the crime books in those days. You didn't have these crimes didn't go on computer. So it meant hours and hours of trawling through these things, not just looking for sex offences, but for anything. And there was an entry in there for a criminal damage. And a woman had come home from work and settling down in her flat off Plumstead Common. Suddenly the window had crashed in, and she didn't know what had happened. She was standing by a light lampshade, and she saw, embedded in the wall, a bullet from a gun. So she called the police, as you probably quite like to, and they took the bullet away. Couldn't find any rhyme nor reason for this ever happening. We matched that, we got hold of that slug because it had disappeared, and it was in the scenes of crime officer's house on his mantelpiece. We eventually tracked it down, matched it to the gun in the tin.
Oh, so
it belonged to that gun. So he had fired that at that woman, just missed her by the stair, probably because of the shadow or something. Missed her, could have killed her there and then.
So he was basically progressing worse and worse. He'd gone from rapes to knives to guns.
Yes, yeah.
So if he hadn't been taken down when he did, he probably would have been.
Well, that brings me on to the other side of this, because we know now that he did murder Rachel Nickell after a long, protracted inquiry. But I thought we put it to bed, but as a result of me bringing out my book, another ex-police officer, Wright, had been doing a lot of work into the Claire Tiltman murder, which happened in January '93 in Greenhithe in Kent. And he was convinced that Robert Napper, could be responsible for this murder. If I just give you a quick run through
that area there isn't that far, is it, from the rest of his crimes?
It's very close, geographically very close. The Kent police were contacted about the possibility of Napper being involved, and they had him as one of their sort of outside suspects, but he was never interviewed over it, and it was never taken very seriously. And it was written off because, we're in Kent, and that's in London. But if you look at actually, Abbey Wood is actually in Kent, although it's in the London borough of Bexley, it's in Kent. And it's 3 train stops down the line, and he went everywhere by train and bus. It would have taken him 20 minutes on the train to get there, to Greenhithe, and the murder was committed within a few hundred yards of the railway station at Greenhithe. So as I say, I didn't take it too seriously at first, but then I started looking into it, and there was more and more to it. I felt that the distinct possibility that Napper could be responsible for the murder of Claire Tiltman. And what we have to bear in mind is that there is someone currently serving life imprisonment for her murder, a guy called Colin Ash Smith, who is currently in Durham prison and has been since his conviction for this murder.
Has he always protested his innocence, though?
Yes.
He has? Okay.
Ash Smith, unfortunately for him, is not a very likeable character, mainly because he has been convicted of 2 very serious assaults on women, which one prior to Claire's murder and one after Claire's murder. It was the one after Claire's murder that really tied things up for the Kent police to put him in the frame for Claire's murder. And he was eventually convicted on bad character evidence because of these attacks on these 2 women quite close to where Claire Tiltman was murdered. But there is no forensic evidence from the scene. There are no witnesses to the murder. And really, bad character evidence is all they've got, and he has appealed and had the appeal turned down. But as I just pointed out, he's always openly admitted the attacks on the previous two women. He has always vehemently denied any involvement in Claire Tiltman's murder, and he actually did know her vaguely. And there were various things within that case that perturbed me, that I don't feel right about, and that's why I'm currently working now with Vince to put a job together to present to Kent Police and about this being a possible miscarriage of justice.
Yeah, because if that isn't him, even though he's a bad character, he's done something else, it doesn't mean he should take the punishment for someone else, does it? No,
and the temptation is, of course, he's committed these horrible offences. Why are we worried about him?
Yeah.
But I'm afraid I can't subscribe to that point of view, especially as I feel if he didn't do it, who did? And that could quite possibly be Robert Napper. He had easy access to it. Rachel was killed in July 92. Claire was killed January 93. Samantha Bisset was killed in November 93. So it's slap bang in the middle. At that date of Claire Tiltman's murder, he was unemployed and he was in receipt of quite a substantial amount of redundancy money. Not a huge amount, but a couple of £1,000. So he was happily moving about without having to work, and we know that he was all over the place. At the beginning of the inquiry, well, obviously they didn't consider Napper because Napper hadn't been arrested when Claire was murdered, but he was considered later, and they looked into it. And one of the reasons I've seen that they dismissed him from the inquiry because they said he was in prison at Christmas. He was in prison for a shoplifting offence, but he'd been released early for Christmas and come out on Boxing Day. But like so many of these, I've had these cases in the past where people say they're in prison because they got 6 months away.
Yeah.
But when you look into it,
Released early.
yeah, they come out, they're out. He was out and about. And it was the 18th of January when she was killed, nearly 3 weeks after he was released from prison.
Obviously, the Robert Napper killings are quite horrific, aren't they? With the knife sort of stabbings. The guy that got convicted, had he had sort of knife offences or?
Yes, he had attacked the other two women using a knife, but nowhere near. One of them could have died. Right. Let's be frank about it. But you still, when you compare the offences of Rachel, Samantha and Claire, they match in ferocity and application, whereas Colin Ash Smith's previous two offences don't really. I mean, you could argue that he was practising and he was getting better at it, but well, it wouldn't, because Claire was in the middle of his 3 offences. But I have my concerns about it, and I'm retired now, but I have no other interest in it other than an interest, and these things do plague me.
So Alan, can I just ask you a little bit of the sort of thought process of these killers, sort of how they think or how they go about their ways, and what's your thought process on this?
Well, it's I mean, I interviewed him after the offence, and he was very difficult to relate to. Now, he already had psychological disorders and had been an outpatient at various mental hospitals since he was a child. His mental state had obviously deteriorated, and as I said earlier, he had been examined by 3 or 4 psychiatrists to assess his mental state. But talking to him in interview was quite a bizarre experience. He couldn't concentrate on the issue in hand. He would veer off into odd patterns of speech, and he had a sort of stockpile of quite long words that he would introduce into the conversation, but didn't really. They weren't the correct word to apply in those circumstances. He just had these odd words, and he would be very subservient almost. He would say, "Thank you very much" all the time. And the other thing about it is, if you got anywhere near asking him questions about the offence, he'd clam up immediately, turn to his solicitor and say, I don't want to go on anymore now. And they would call a stop. And it must have been stopped 5 or 6 times in this way. As soon as we started to get him to open up, he would suddenly close down, turn to his solicitor and ask for an adjournment. He was very calm and quiet when he was in the cell. He didn't rant and rave. As far as I understand it, he's a model prisoner.
Oh, really?
He doesn't mix with anyone. He's not the sort of person who would ever have had any real friends. Certainly not girlfriends. And all of the reports we got back from places where he'd worked, the women were frightened of him.
Oh, really?
She, especially if they were in a position of authority above him, he couldn't handle that.
As in the way he was with them, or just his sort of...
Oh, he would be, he'd be aggressive. Not physically aggressive, but in his speech, he would try and demean them. Just generally be an obnoxious character.
So that was only towards women as such, not...
Mainly towards women. He in his digs where he lived, he was convinced that he was being spied on all the time, that people were introducing poisons into his food. And this was all progressing down the line at the same time that his activity in the rape field were getting progressively more violent. And then we know
like
he
a
killed...
paranoia.
Yes,
kicking in, like...
that was almost out of control. Well, he held a job down, managed to hold this job down in the factory. It was pretty menial work, but he held it down until he had got the sack, because people just couldn't cope with him anymore. He wouldn't do what he was told. He would be argumentative about everything. That was how he was.
How was he with the police and yourself?
Subservient. That's the word I would use.
Just no aggressive to him or not?
No, absolutely none. Absolutely none. He was like a wet fish. Characterless.
Quite strange, really, when you think of someone actually who can murder someone and go to the extreme, then to not be able to challenge.
Well, as I understand it, it's there are sides to his psyche. That one minute he's this Robert Napper, and then he's that Robert Napper.
Right.
And even during the killing of Samantha, the one offence where he had the luxury of time on his hands, one of the witnesses from the flat above described how she heard 2 men shouting at each other. And one of them was shouting, "That's enough, leave it, leave it." Now, we believe that was him shouting himself.
Oh, really? Blimey.
Because there was no one else there, that's for absolute sure.
Just having a conversation with yourself.
Yeah.
Where was that? Where was...
In the flat, in Samantha Bisset's
That
flat,
was Samantha Bisset's
shouting
flat.
out, yeah.
Blimey. So he was battling with himself on a daily
Battling with
basis,
himself,
pretty much.
yeah. So there was still something there that he knew it was wrong.
Yeah.
But
A bit like an angel and a devil on each shoulder, just
and
directing him.
reading his writings, he believed, for instance, that the IRA were after him, that he'd won the Nobel Peace Prize in Angola, and he had this thing about calendars that the government had taken several years out of the calendar to do him out of some award or other. So he was always behind times. And this was the government's fault. He knew he was on personal terms with the Queen. She knew what he was up to and she agreed with everything that he did.
So it really was not quite a fault again.
Yeah, I mean, I had forgotten those aspects, but there were. I mean, this guy. Many members of the public think, you're caught now. You're gonna pull the old madness card, but I think in Robert Napper's case,
He was gone.
he was irredeemably.
Well, could you just tell us a little bit about Robert Napper's sort of family?
He was born in Abbey Wood. I think it was. He had two other siblings. Very violent father who caused a lot of problems in the household. Left when he was about 7. Even in his primary school, he was always a problem child. Kept himself very much to himself. Nobody could ever get to Robert Napper. He went on a holiday, a family holiday. Someone befriended the family, classic stuff. Befriended the family, took them camping, and sexually assaulted the children, including Napper. Now the other children, obviously, they had a deeply unhappy childhood, but they all seemed to have overcome it. They were all received treatment for what they'd suffered, but Robert had never ever got over it.
Yeah, still carried that with him.
He carried that with him, and funny enough, when after he was arrested, one of the things, obviously, you've got to notify everybody, and I had to find out whether his father was still alive. So eventually, through the Australian police, found him, dug him out down in New South Wales somewhere, and arranged to speak to him on a telephone call, and got through at the arranged time, and introduced myself and got him to introduce himself and tell me a bit about Robert Napper, which he couldn't very much. I just wanted to verify that it was his son. He did enough to do that. So then I told him I had some very bad news, that his son had been arrested for rape and murder. And there was a silence on the phone, and then this strong Australian voice bellowed down the phone, "I blame his mother." So beg your pardon, I blame his mother, it's all her fault. I said, well, you've obviously had a shock. I said, look, I'll phone you the same time tomorrow, and you can have a think about it, and if there's anything you want to ask me. I phoned him back on the arranged time, never answered, I never heard from him again.
Just wanted to wash his hands of it completely. Yeah. Alan, can I just ask you about your own mindset of sort of building up to the arrest and your thought process? Did this sort of case make you sort of not sleep at night or stuff like that?
Well, this obviously once we found out who our quarry was, Robert Napper, we were all hugely excited, and then Pam Robinson, our indexer, shouted out, "I know who that is. That's the Green Chain Rapist." And my first reaction was I knew that the photo fit was, we ran a little porter cabin office down in Thamesmead at the time. That's where we ran the inquiry from, and there was a photo fit of him on the notice board in the public part of the police station. So I ran out there, jumped over the counter, past the uniform officer who was standing there, ripped it off, ran back into the office, and we compared it to the photograph of Napper, and we just knew that was. So we were getting more and more excited about this, and then Detective Superintendent Banks and DI Brian Reeves, who was the deputy, sort of got everyone to steady up. First of all, we wanted to keep it in house, that We didn't want everyone knowing that we had the suspect for this job.
Yeah.
So it was all kept very much under wraps. But we were very, very excited that we'd eventually put this job to bed. For me personally, because it did give me sleepless nights.
Yeah.
I had seen what he had done. We went 6 months without knowing who was responsible for that. Now, it won't take a genius to work out, looking at that scene, that that wasn't a one-off. That was going to happen again somewhere. And it was imperative that we caught this bloke. We had to catch him. We had to move heaven and earth to get that bloke, because as sure as eggs were eggs, he was going to do it again. So when we eventually did find Robert Napper, and then these other things, because all of this background stuff about the tin in the woods, the shot through the window, that all came to light while he was still in his bedsit down in the high street. And then we started to build up, put him under surveillance. I wasn't on the surveillance team, that's a specialist job, but I was in an observation point, watching him going in and out of his flat. Yeah, there were long hours, but used to that. And then we knew we were building up, because we'd been told that we weren't going to give him any chance to commit another offence. You just can't imagine it, what would have happened if he'd have gone out once we'd identified him and committed some horrendous offence.
Is that something that would play on your mind, like if you know it is and he's gone out and done it again, would just make you feel like
you obviously you think about it, but you've got to you've got to, just step back. What have we got here? What more can we get before we nick him, to make sure that when we do arrest him, we've got everything there and we're not faffing about.
So he's not back out on the streets.
Yeah. So we had him under surveillance for a week, and eventually, 2 days before, Mickey Banks called us all in, and he said that he was going to bring the team, get a larger team. We already had the surveillance officers come in, but that he got other people in, and we had a body dog in case there were any body parts in the flat, because it's a system that works. So we had this massive meeting with all of these people, our team, our little 5-man team, sitting in the CID office at Plumstead, that had suddenly grown to about 60 people sitting around this massive desk. Mickey Banks tells us what's going to happen, tells everybody who everybody is, explains what time we're going to all meet in the morning and we're going to nick him, and where he's going to be put, and everything's worked out in advance. And my part was to put a little team together, go to the address and arrest him on the street, which didn't happen, as I've already explained. So, came to my part, went all the way around the table, everyone saying what they were going to do, what they had to do. Came to my part, I went through my little scenario of we, merry little crew of 6, would go down there and cover the street, and when he came out, we'd pounce on him, take him in, that's it, nick him, take him to Bexley. And then I looked to my left for the next guy to do his little party piece. And the voice suddenly appears next to the senior investigating officer. I don't agree with any of that. And I was put firmly in my place that my arrest team tactics were woefully inadequate. We needed double cordons, we needed dogs, we needed backup from territorial support, we needed what we didn't need, I couldn't imagine. So I was a little bit taken aback. And then Mickey Banks looked down the table at me with his gimlet eye and said, "Alan, are you happy with the plan you have in place?" And I thought, well, this is it. And I said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "Right, we'll go with that then. But if it all goes wrong, it's down to you." So that night I went, the meeting finished, and that did put me out of my stride a bit.
Yeah.
Because then I'm thinking...
You got that added pressure.
Yes, I'm thinking, well, I thought it was all right, but what if it does all go wrong? But I thought, no, just stick with it. And I had a sleepless night. And coming into Plumstead in the morning to do the arrest, we had to be in about some god-awful hour, about 5:30 or 6 o'clock, something like that. So I got up even earlier and I drove down to Samantha's flat and I just sat there for a couple of minutes. And just through my own mind, I thought, well, Samantha, Jazmine, said, we're hopefully today we're going to catch it all up and at least get some sort of justice for you. And then I drove down to Plumstead and picked up the team and gave them a final briefing. And I've been through, how it all went wrong, but came right in the end, as these things do. Just got to think on your feet a bit.
So the other guy really wanted everything all singing, all dancing.
Oh, yeah.
Wouldn't that sort of alarm him a little bit more though, like if there's a noise activity?
Yeah.
So the way he was going to do it, he's sort of out of the blue, isn't it?
It's a bloke getting nicked.
Yeah.
It may be a big job, but it's a bloke getting nicked.
But if you hear a load of dogs barking helicopters, you're going to be
yes.
more likely to be alert.
Exactly.
Especially if he's got firearms offences.
Yeah.
So.
None of us were armed, by the way.
So,
Or even had body vests on.
Alan, can I ask you a little bit? So you've wrote a book about this, haven't you?
Yes.
Which is, where is it? We've got it somewhere. This is the book there.
Hold it up, Lee. A little bit higher.
So this is Alan's personal story of the... Sorry, got it? So can you just tell us a little bit through that, Alan? That's your personal story there.
This book, there's a lot more in here than I've been able to squash into this interview.
Yeah.
But after the Nickell revelations, I thought to myself, I've got a story to tell here about my part as a junior officer investigating a very, very serious, high-profile offence, which fell to me by accident. It would normally be the role that I was taking would have normally been performed by a much more senior officer than I was. And I thought it involved so many aspects that affect the police, the public, that I wanted to write it down. There's the side of it where why does the media go into raptures over a murder like Rachel Nickell and doorstep families all over the country and pour resources into it and bribe people to tell their stories, whereas Samantha reaches page 2 of the News Shopper for 1 week and then that's the end of it. Whereas in fact it was just as, if not more horrendous than the Nickell murder. So I wanted to examine that, the media's role in what happens in the investigation of serious offences. Then there was the psychological profiling aspect of it, how we'd gone down this path of relying too much on psychiatrists' opinions or profilers' opinions. They are there as tools for us to use, not for us to be led by.
Yeah.
And these 3 cases absolutely exemplify how the traps that you can fall into if you put too much reliance on psychological profiling. So there was that, and then there was the mere fact of the grind of one of these sorts of investigations, and a little bit about the people that are down there in the coal mine, digging away, whose main worry was that maybe next week, next month, they're going to get shut down.
Yeah.
All the while knowing that Mr. Robert Napper was going to do it again. So I thought I'd put these down in a book form, and it came fairly easy to me. Rattled it off, And the idea behind it being that if anything else, when I'm long gone, my kids or my grandchildren might pick it up and think, well, that's what the old man did. No one, that was the reasoning behind it.
Yeah.
And then I mentioned it to, I was doing a documentary on a murder. I mentioned it to the director, and he asked to have a look at it, passed it on to a publisher, who took it up, published it, and then it was made into a film on a series on Channel 4. And I'm now hoping, or in the process of, writing another book, which will be on the good possibility of Napper being involved in the murder of Claire Tiltman.
Which it looks like he was by the Vincent Wright's interview we done.
Yes, well, I refer all your viewers back to Vincent Wright's interview on this, because he's done a sterling bit of work around that Claire Tiltman murder. All unpaid. No other incentive other than just justice be done.
Yeah, get justice. Well, if people want to read the book, Alan, where can they find that on?
Well, it's on Amazon.
Amazon.
And you can get it through Waterstones as well. So.
You just hold it up to the camera there, Alan. Hold it up a little bit higher so the viewers can see it. A little bit higher. That's it.
Yes, on Amazon and in Waterstones. You can order it through them. Or the publisher. Hang on, let me see what. Oh yeah. And of course the publisher, Waterside Press, which specialise in crime books. That's it.
Lovely. Wind it up. We wind it up there, Alan. Thanks for coming. Much appreciated. Thanks for today.
Well, nice meeting you, and
look forward to the new book.